This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of Basket Case Clubs. I'm your host Michael Connelly. Today I have a very special interview for you and it is truly one of a story of a basket case that has turned into a showcase. This is a fascinating story of the Bulimba Bowls Club, or actually the Bulimba Memorial Bowls and Community Club Incorporated, and their president Rod Jackson shared some time with us this week to tell us the story of their amazing turnaround over literally the last 8 months. The club has pretty much been, as far as basket cases go, this club was pretty much scraping the bottom of the barrel. It, I have to admit, wasn't quite as bad as it could possibly be, but I tell you what, it was getting bloody close. So this is a fantastic interview where Rod shares with us some general principles for turning basket case clubs into showcase clubs, but also he gets really specific in some of the specific initiatives that these guys have taken over the last 8 months. So it's a story of really rags to not yet riches, but they're certainly on their way and they've got a great mindset. So joining me for this interview also is Chris Kenward, who has been working with the club for about 18 months. So Chris got to see the club as they were pretty much at their worst, and he's helped coax them through to turn them into the showcase that they are fast becoming. And after the interview, I will join you again to give you a bit of a summary, because the ideas that Rod goes through, they come thick and fast. So I'll give you a bit of a summary at the end of the episode, so we'll come back to that shortly. Let's get straight into the interview. Joining me now is Rod Jackson, the president of Bulimba Memorial Bowls and Community Club. G'day Rod, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, and you?
Very well, thank you. And also joining me again is Chris Kenward from our wonderful team at CPR Group. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Terrific. So Chris has been doing quite a bit of work with a number of bowls clubs, and Bulimba is one of those shiny performers that has been doing so well over the last, 18 months or so, I suppose. Yep. And there's some great stories that Chris has been able to share with me that Rod has shared with him. Rod and the team at Bulimba Bowls Club have been able to share with him. So we thought that it'd be a great opportunity to share some of those with our listeners.
Okay, well, we're going to start with, I guess, winding the clock back 18 months and when we first started getting involved. And I'm going to ask Rod if you might just to describe what the club was like in those days.
Well, interesting to say the least. The club prior to COVID and the 12 months prior to COVID had a management committee that, should I say, the Secretary-Treasurer was in fact probably a little bit secretive about the results. The committee wasn't receiving financial reporting at all. And I mean by that, no financial reporting, not even a statement of sales or bank balances.
So for what sort of period did that go on, Rod?
That went on for probably 18 months. The club has a horrid history in terms of its committee and its management. Going back 3 committees, the club was run probably pretty close into the ground. There was another committee elected where the secretary and the president decided that the club was non-viable. Their advice was to shut it. 2 members, one was appointed secretary-treasurer, as I said before, was coming back to very secretive in terms of the results, in terms of the performance. In hindsight, which is always 20/20 vision, was unqualified to run either of the roles, the secretary or treasurer.
Yeah, it's a really strange one that those 2 roles, which often probably are the bear the biggest workload, were combined.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost setting the blight to fail, as it would be in any case.
Absolutely, and it's probably like giving somebody an Uber license without having a driver's license. It just didn't fit. He didn't understand the basis of commerciality. A number of members of that committee decided that this was going nowhere fast, and that was basically as a result of a manager failing to do any cash bankings for a month, failing to be able to prove where the cash went, and a little bit of disappointment with the role of the treasurer in being able to police it. And as we got deeper into it, him looking at the results or sharing any results with the committee so that the committee could go with it. The net result was, under our constitution at the time, forced a special general meeting. Our previous secretary-treasurer disappeared, never to be seen again. And as a net result, the manager at that point of time, who we believe responsible for theft, was dismissed from his role.
So going back just before we get to the special general meeting, which I think is a key turning point in what has happened, we had things like the meetings were very poorly run. So not only was the secretary treasurer not presenting any reports or providing much information, but he wasn't actually being asked any probing questions either.
Yeah,
there was quite a passive.
He sort of was, but he was ego driven enough and had a forceful enough personality to ignore the requests for information. Part of that was that the financial reporting in terms of accounting and normal business practices was just not being followed. In terms of accounting, figures weren't being entered into the system. The method of cash flow management was wait until you get a final notice, pay that bill, and then wait for the next final notice, which obviously has its own issues in smoothing of your cash flow, particularly your outgoing cash flows. A whole gamut of problems. On the other terms, the manager was the greens. Bowling club requires greens were falling into disrepair. There was very little maintenance done on the club. In fact, maintenance schedule. So we had a number of issues, mainly down to bad management and bad board management. I mean, the board's got to take some responsibility.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to probe before, the sense that whilst the treasurer wasn't providing answers, the committee weren't finding ways to get those answers. They needed to be, because the problems were prolonged as a result of them not getting those answers.
Yeah, and they got worse. I mean, we had members lending the club money so that they could buy beer for special functions or buy alcohol for special functions.
So cash flow was that low that members are putting in money just to buy trading stock?
Yeah, lending money, not donating money.
So I imagine that there were some warning signs that people saw, but those were maybe bullied out of the way, it sounds?
Bullied's a nice word. Unless you're aware of an issue, to understand it, to move forward is a difficult position to be in.
And there are, and I'm trying to find my words appropriately here, but there are a number of people on that committee who were very passive by nature. They weren't, I guess, outgoing people or overly confident people. So when they ask a question and get told no, or I'll report next month, they didn't have the wherewithal to force that and to say, well, come on, you've been telling us that for 2 or 3 months now. We need some answers. And it was just allowed to carry on. So I guess the mismatch in the strength of personalities between the characters led to the difficulties not being addressed anywhere near in a timely manner.
I think there's another underlying issue, and that was, I imagine, like a lot of other clubs, is that the popular guys get elected, tabletop accounting at the end of the week. If I've got more money in the bank than what I started with, I'm doing well. Was a lot of the issues, and I would recommend that to any other club, have a very hard look at those people that are going on the committee. At that stage, we were running a $500,000 a year business. We were employing 3 or 4 people, and the guy who was secretary treasurer had very little commercial experience. And you've got to operate it as a commercial entity rather than a nice club to have a drink at.
Yeah. We also had some broader issues around, there was very little engagement with the community, there was very little engagement with elected representatives, council, very little use of social media, the local community had stopped coming to the club typically. All those sort of issues were all playing into what was a pretty sad situation. One situation I remember at the time, which sums up maybe some of the issues faced, was that the club was behind on its reporting to the Office of Fair Trade's annual report hadn't been done. They couldn't submit their annual report because they couldn't get audited accounts. They couldn't get audited accounts because they couldn't afford to pay the auditor the bill from the previous year, and he refused to audit this year's until his bill was paid. That's where the club was at. So
yeah, and that sums it up in a nutshell.
It does. Picture. So tell us a bit more about this manager we had, Rod. So we had a bad time. Manager was running the place largely unaccountably, not being supervised, not being checked. So what did we find when we started digging into his activities?
The first thing we found is that because of the way that the books had been treated, you had no way of assessing how much damage he had done to the club. You know, there were things like where a member paid his membership dues in cash, never recorded, never passed on to Bowls Queensland. We had a period where there was no banking done for a month. That month happened to be December, which is our biggest trading period. We took the case to the police, and as I said, the books were in such a disastrous state. There was no diligence over the manager's operations. The safe was open and visible to any employee that walked past it. The misconception is you can't go to the police and charge somebody with robbery. What you can do is present the evidence that they were stealing from you, and then the police make a judgment as to whether they will take it further. We just didn't have enough evidence to stand on to get this guy punished, apart from all of the other rumours and innuendo that was floating around from him.
Yeah.
However, we ended up dismissing him in January, and we struggled along through to the disastrous events of March the 24th, where we got shut down because of COVID-19, which was quite frightening. The net result of that is that our ongoing expenses, such as insurance, electricity, groundskeeping, running refrigeration, keep on going, but your revenue in actual fact reduces to zero. Beer, as not everybody knows, has a use-by date. We tipped $1,800 worth of alcohol down the drain because it went out. Pity, if we'd been given some advice, we could have had a great party. And then we reopened on July 3rd, and we reopened with approximately $600 in the bank. No beer. The spirit stock that we had left at the time we closed, COVID-19 closed us down. We were reopened in a disastrous financial position. If you'd been really smart, you would have just closed the doors and walked away. But apparently enough of us were dumb enough to say that we liked the place and we'd like to continue drinking here and having some fun here with our friends, and we should move ahead. We were very lucky in the fact after the special general meeting that we had elected a board of 10, which is too many, but we had 10, one of whom included me, a non-bowling president of a bowling club. We picked up people who had a lot of commercial experience in running businesses and understanding how businesses run. In a good hard look at the business, we believed that it was savable, not saleable. I'm not quite sure the council would agree with it.
Salability.
But daunting task, about $600 in the bank, shitload of debt, no compliance with taxation department requirements. We hadn't had a BAS submitted under the previous committee for 2 years. PAYG and superannuation payments were outstanding. So yeah, it was a basket case. A member who was a retired member lent us some cash to allow us to start operating the pokies. We have some signage on the place, and we went and begged and pleaded for those patrons those sponsors that had signage to pay their signage, which they did. And I think we finished up with about $5,000 or $6,000, which allowed us to commence trading and started promoting the club in terms of becoming not only a bowls club, but a community facility.
So now tell us the story of what sort of initiatives you've started to put into place and how you've been able to turn it around in reality, Rod, so quickly.
Well, the first one was we stopped theft.
That's a very good place to start.
We started by putting payment plans in with our outstanding creditors, and then came back into putting supply of goods back on so we physically could open. We went to Facebook as an advertising medium. To date, we currently post on Facebook 4 times a week, starting on Wednesday, telling people what's on for the week, running through to the functions that are through until Sunday.
And you're getting some good engagement with those posts?
We engage with between 12 and 14,000 people a month. COVID-19 had some silver linings. We actually became party central for kids' birthday parties. And part of that promotion was to go out and purchase our own jumping castle. So we had continuity of supply, if you like, of the jumping castle every weekend. Yep. Because you couldn't have more than 10 people in your house, you couldn't hold a kid's birthday party. Which of course draws in the parents' parents. We re-established food into the premises, and we did that in an interesting way where we offered a young guy use of the facilities here for no charge. That meant that we could offer food without any risk to the club. And that relationship, I must say, has worked well. He does great food. People come down for the food. We reintroduced some odd music where we could get it, mainly from people donating their time and their ability to get in front of live audiences rather than sitting in a room, which they've had to do over COVID, and generally moved the club forward. The problem with bowls clubs is that they're seen to be full of staid, old, nasty people who don't want visitors. And if you're not a bowler, well, what are you doing in my club? To opening the club out to provide it as a community asset. The club hadn't taken a grant since somewhere around about 2015. we went on an active program of seeking grants, and we took some $27,500 worth of grants out of the state government, the local council, in terms of relief on some of our utility costs. We replenished the point of sale system. The significant thing was the increase in revenue, where the club has probably increased its revenue pre-COVID by about 30 to 40%.
And that's through diversified income.
Yeah, and look, we've done a couple of things about that. Most clubs will charge you for barefoot bowls. We took a policy decision that the greens were there. We were going to pay for them anyway, and I'd much rather have somebody paying for 2 schooners than paying $5 for a game of bowls. So we still continue to offer free barefoot bowls.
How's that going for your numbers, Rod?
Oh, great. Look, we're doing probably between 40 and 80 barefoot bowlers per weekend.
Great.
It's added to our function revenue, where people will come down, have a party. They'll wrap that around a barefoot bowls game. They'll support our catering guy, where he's now doing all of our function catering as well. So, you know, the combined impact, barefoot bowls, publicity, community awareness,
Parties,
food, lack of theft, and now some sensible accounting reporting and some really effective cash flow management has probably the key points in how we've turned this club around.
I might add a couple if I may, or maybe get you to elaborate on a couple, because you quite naturally focus on the commercial side, which I know is your interest and obviously hugely important. But also internally, you've done some things with the new committee where we've did some training with the committee to get them a little bit more knowledgeable on what their roles are. And I think you've done a good job, in my opinion, of allocating tasks to some of those people who are now accountable for doing various things and reporting back to the committee so they know they're getting done. Yeah.
Look, the committee of the Bowls Club has an enormous amount of work that needs to be done, which is unpaid labour, if you like. We were probably lucky that I retired just before COVID hit, which was fantastic news. However, to get people to stand up and come in and put in the time and energy, particularly while they're running their own businesses or they're working full time, is enormously difficult. I think if other clubs are listening to it, you have to sit down with your potential committee members and say, this is going to cost you 10 to 20 hours a month of your time.
Yeah.
Are you prepared to commit that time? If they can't say yes, they're not going to make it on the committee. It's not a task of coming along to a meeting of 10 people and agreeing to the work that 2 people have done. You know, it has to be a commitment that you're going to put the time, the energy and the effort in to move the club forward, because it won't happen by itself.
Which is where you were 18 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing I think you've done well, if I may say, and you might be able to talk a little bit to this, is
self-praise is no recommendation.
you've got your sort of ratio of staff costs to turnover significantly improved and under control. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. What we've been doing with our bar performance reporting is looking at, as Chris said, the ratio of wage costs to sales, which is a methodology used by a lot of the major supermarket chains, a lot of the major businesses in order to control your wage expenses. We were, under the prior administration, operating between wage percentages of 35 to 50% of sales.
Yeah.
Effectively, what that means is you don't make any profit, you're operating the business at a loss. Just understanding that ratio that says, gee, I've got to keep my wage costs down. I've got to manage my wage costs. We had a manager who not only paid himself but managed the payroll. You know, you get your wages under control, you get your sales up, you look at all of your expenses. In fact, we took our insurance to the marketplace and we reduced our insurance costs by $3,500. We took our electricity costs to the marketplace and reduced our electricity costs by some $2,500 per annum. We sat down and started to negotiate with our suppliers. A lot of suppliers have promotional money which they can donate. You don't get it unless you ask. They're not going to come along and say, "Oh, Rod, you're a nice bloke. Here's $300 for a free keg of beer." We're about to put an illuminated sign up on Thine Road, if anybody knows it. to create some awareness of the club. We've rebadged the club from the Bulimba Memorial Bowls and Community Club to the Bulimba Bowlo.
Yep.
And redone that signage in an attempt to attract a younger crowd to replenish God's waiting room.
Yep.
So you've called it what everyone calls it anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's effective.
Look, don't get me wrong. This is a work in progress and will be a work in progress for a considerable amount of time. Like all businesses, unless you have a continual change for improvement program, you're going to die. You're going to stagnate, which is effectively what happened to the club.
Okay, and also then go back to some of the things we picked up before, but you now have good relationships with elected representatives who are also throwing money at you, councils throwing services at you, and facility upgrades.
So we actively went out and looked at our three local representatives. The local councillor has been very supportive. The local state member is very supportive. In fact, she's holding her small business forums here. And we've just applied, hopefully with some support from the federal member, to drought-proof the club by putting down a spear pump. We've refurnished the outside of the club. That was due to a council grant. Actually, this afternoon we'll move forward to the first step of installing our solar panels on the roof.
Great.
The steps of that is that we spend approximately $400 to $500 a week on electricity. That will save us $20,000 a year, approximately.
Yeah.
More importantly, it'll save us $100,000 over the next 5 years.
Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's
putting down a spear pump will save us $15,000 a year, just $75,000 over a 5-year period. And you have to look at the long-term benefits rather than the short-term impulses that can come with those things. We still have some responsibilities in terms of the fact that we're a service club, and the local RSL sub-branch meets out of here. Mm-hmm. Our heritage is as a bowls club, so we've got to preserve that. But we also have to do those two things, put cash over the bank. We've got to into the bank.
That was so brilliantly put, Rod. To do that, we have to put money in the bank. That is so important that every club understands that we have a purpose. And if we try and run on a shoestring budget and we try and only scrimp and save to keep our prices down, that we're not going to be able to grow and we're not going to be able to meet our true purpose correctly. So it sounds like what you've done is, and surely for all of our listeners, that you've provided almost a pick list of ideas. Now, we're not looking to take your ideas and replicate them somewhere else.
Oh, please don't. I need the kids to come here and jump on the cars and not go down the road. Although I must say, most of the other clubs in the area are putting on jumping castles.
Right.
What's next then, Rod? I'll lead again.
It might be
that makes us trendsetters rather than followers.
Exactly. And it might be the gamut of what you've done that has generated the success, because you've looked to control expenses, you've looked to control wages, you've looked to control unexpected outgoings through theft, should we say. The solar panel program, the sinking a bore, the money saving over long term, which you will then be able to invest in programs, and any profits that you're able to invest then with compounding, you will be in a great position, not just now, but well beyond your tenure. So that is a great pick list for, not, as I said, not for other clubs to come and say, well, I'll do that, but to think that there are other ways to turn clubs around than let's lower our prices.
I think there's another issue for not discounting the role of your elected representatives. And Chris, during his period of consultancy, introduced us to the people inside council that are the movers and groovers. And there's a lot that you can achieve from working directly with the council employees, officers, as opposed or officers. Yeah. That doesn't come with council representation, and that's things like we took a garden which was a weed bed, took advantage of the council's 23 plants for clubs, and we turned that garden into now what's an attractive part of the environment.
Yeah. There's a lot of help out there, and a lot of clubs are a little either slow or they don't know about the opportunities that are available to
ignorant
them.
And hesitant.
So there's certainly a lot of support the council will offer, especially when someone like yourself are in a council building. They want to make sure that you're successful, and they'll go to great lengths to make sure that they can help wherever they can.
I suppose for me, Rod, there's a couple of things that are real takeaways here. The first one is to go back to the top, and it is to look for the warning signs. So in being an elected representative in a club, it's your job to be looking at everybody and making sure that everybody is acting with due diligence and care and respect and within the law as they should be. And if you have concerns, not to be bullied out of raising those concerns and not to ever let something go on for 18 months.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you've got to remember, and you've certainly got to let your committee members understand that they have almost effectively the same responsibilities as a director of a company.
And for me, the second part of it just follows on nicely from the discussion about the committee is don't come to a committee meeting as a group of 10 people to approve the work that 2 people are going to have to go away and do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's next for Rod Jackson then?
What's next for the club? We've got, let's talk about the club. My
Nice deflection. So politics, it sounds like, Rod.
No. My next move is my birthday on Thursday, Chris. Only 4 shopping days to go.
Right. Noted.
We've still got to move the club forward. The club's, as I said before, our maintenance schedule and our renewal within the facility has been zipped to zero for the last 10 years. So we're in a demographic where we're $1.2 million houses, and the club looks like a refugee camp somewhere in Southeast Asia. We've moved forward on that, on updating the furniture on a large deck area that we have and a beer garden that we have. But once you move internally into the club, it's like stepping back into the 1980s where the furniture has never been replaced. The paint colour scheme is it needs renovation, rejuvenation, and to fit into the expectation of the area for somewhere where they'd like to come for a drink after work, or they'd like to bring their friends down, or they'd like to bring their family down. We're currently working with the accessibility department within the Brisbane City Council, which will make us accessible to disabled people. So that means that we'll be able to go out and say, hey, if you're in a wheelchair, or if you're injured, or you're on crutches, or you're not physically able to go for a run up a 45-degree ramp to get into the place, come along. We have a number of objectives in terms of grants and where we want to go. The one thing I will say about grants is that what you've got to do on your committee is have somebody who is prepared to do the grants process. And what happens with grants is you get 4 to 6 weeks notice that a grant is coming out and the value. So what you have to do is you have to determine the targets that you want for grants. You have to put in the work now so that when the grant is announced, you've got the documentation, you've got the ability to slam that grant down on the ground. You've also got to say within your own club finances, what are the things that I can afford to pay for to improve? There's those improvements that you have to put into your facilities that attract people into your facility. It's planning ahead that says, I've got a vision for where I want to take this club, or as a committee, not as I. The vision forward as to where I'm going to take the club. Ours primarily short term is improving facilities. The next term, and by short term I probably mean 3 to 4 years because of the financial capability of doing it. Then you've got to look at your long term plans as to where you're going to go, what you're going to add to the club to make it viably commercial or commercially viable.
Rod, it has been an absolute pleasure to hear your story, and it is certainly one from Basket Case to Showcase. It has been an incredibly busy 8 months by the sounds of it since you were able to open your doors again in July 2020.
Yeah, I was talking to a member the other day and saying we've got 80% of the job done.
Yeah.
However, recognise that it's going to take us 80% of the time to get the last 20% done.
Yep.
And you've got to say to your members, well, appreciate, we're doing a good job. We've got a lot more to do, but what we've done in 6 months is significant.
Yep, that's great. So, Chris, thank you for the work that you've done with the Bowls Club. It has obviously been of assistance to them. And Rod, I've got to say a big congratulations. It sounds like you and the team are really on a great journey. So, yes, congratulations, Rod. And thank you very much for joining us on Basket Case Clubs and telling us how Bulimba Memorial Bowls and Community Club, or more affectionately, Bulimba Bowlo, has absolutely moved to being a showcase club. Well done.
Thank you.
All good.
So that's the fascinating story of Bulimba Memorial Bowls and Community Club. What I want to do is just quickly recap on why the club was such a basket case club to begin with, and what they've been able to do really specifically to emerge from being a basket case into becoming a shining showcase. So let's start with obviously the alleged theft. That was backed up by this secrecy of a committee member who could have been holding all of the cards for the club. And one of the big red flags that often goes off is when somebody like that just disappears, just off, they're just gone. So obviously that's a big concern when that happens. Coupled that with what was pretty bad or maybe just unskilled or almost blind mismanagement of the club. They hadn't submitted a BAS for 2 years, so they're carrying this massive tax debt. And then, whammo, COVID hits. So just when you think the situation is bad enough, bang, 3.5 months of no trade, but still dealing with outgoing bills. Then when they reopened in July, they had $600 in the bank and no beer. So what a starting point, it must have been just so difficult. And at that point, it would have been, as Rod even said, it would have been so logical for everyone to just throw their hands in the air and say, thank you very much, here council, here's the keys, we're off, and just dust their hands, thank you very much, see you later. But at that point, they started by taking the first step of borrowing money from a member. Now, this is not something that we would normally recommend, and certainly not a decision that any committee should take lightly, but it was enough to enable them to start trading. So I think that that's why they made that decision to begin with. Then they made a good decision to actually go and collect on the sponsorship money that they should have received for the signage that was outside the front of the clubhouse, and based on the goodwill of those sponsors, that money came in. So that was great. Then they've got a bit of cash in the bank. Then they've turned it around and said, okay, we're not doing anything to promote ourselves. Nobody else is going to be out there promoting the Bowlo, so that's our job. So that's when they got onto Facebook and started becoming much more active in actively promoting themselves and what they're doing in the community. This is the point that I love then. Rather than just thinking, okay, what can we do? We can sell beer and we can play bowls. What should we do? I know, let's buy a jumping castle and let's encourage kids' birthday parties down here. So that was a great idea, and it shows you the breadth of thinking. You don't need to just say, nobody else has done this, therefore we can't do it. It's a great idea, and one that has really been pivotal in creating another reason why people would go to Bulimba Bowls Club. The club made a policy decision not to charge for barefoot bowling, and they've made a decision to also have a food supplier who they don't charge. So there's a relationship that they've built there. And one of the things that I think is really important is whenever you create a relationship like these guys have got, where there's no money that changes hands when the food supplier is providing food on a regular night, but if there's a function going on, then there's some profit sharing arrangement that they've set into place. The important thing to do here is not to change it. Once you've set a process like that in train, then don't get greedy. Don't go looking and saying, how can we squeeze this and how can we make more money? Because that's when the situation breaks. So make sure that you set it up in good faith and then operate in that good faith. The club has started accessing grants, which is great. They've installed a new point of sale system. The barefoot bowls that they've got, and the reason that they do that for free is so that they can then increase their bar trade. So as Rod said, he'd rather just provide free bowls and then encourage people to be there longer and spend more money at the club. Then they've entered into catering and functions, so they're providing functions and they're able to cater for those functions now. Behind all of that, they've finally set into place some really sensible accounting practices and good cash flow management. That goes hand in hand with a committee that knows what they're doing. So yes, 10 people on a committee is too many, but if they all know what they're doing and they're all doing the jobs through good task allocation and the fact that people need to be reporting on what has been done and what needs to be done, then real change can happen. Importantly, Rod made the point of getting committee members to commit to 10 to 20 hours per month. Now, 10 to 20 hours per month, when I throw it out like that, might sound like a lot, but actually when you divide that down to a weekly basis, okay, there'll be some busy weeks, but if you understand that this might take 2 to 4 hours per week, that's actually reasonable. It's a reasonable commitment, but you're stepping into a role knowing that that's what's required of you. Then the club was able to reduce their outgoings. So they reduced their insurance by simply, as Rod said, taking their insurance to market. They did exactly the same with their electricity. Now, the amount of money that they're saving per month adds up per year, and then that builds up a lot over time. Rod also sought to seek donations from their suppliers. So supply donations, as he said, they're there, but they're not going to offer them. If you know that there's a little bit of community money set aside in some of these big companies, then by all means, What harm is there in asking? They're installing new signage for the club, and this is great for creating more awareness that the club is there. That awareness then snowballs, it then leads to increased trade, and that leads to increased revenue. It's simply rebadging as Bulimba Bowlo. Like I said, everyone already calls it that now, so why don't we just go with it? And that's great. It also means that it's breaking down those barriers to, as Rod mentioned, the thinking that a bowls club is full of old fuddy-duddies who say, get off my greens. It's not like that, and it certainly doesn't need to be like that. Take that a couple of steps further and let's say, okay, how else can we look at saving money? Because a penny saved is a penny earned, as my grandpa used to say. So they're sinking a bore pump. Now, not only will that mean that they'll be reducing their reliance on the town water supply and therefore reducing their costs, but it's also helping them to drought-proof the club. So as water restrictions increase, the club is still able to keep their greens green, which means that they're still able to play bowls on them, which means that they're still able to trade. Then they're doing exactly the same thing by installing solar panels on the roof. They're also refurbishing the outside of the clubhouse and installing new furniture and fittings out there so that the place doesn't necessarily look like a refugee camp anymore. They recognise, though, that there's still a way to go, so there's still work to be doing on the inside of the club. So they're working on their disability access, for instance, which is great. And even that they've gone and got free trees from council because they can. And they've been able to put those trees to good use to be able to make a little native garden right there at the club. So Rod shared with us lots of great ideas that the club is implementing, but there's a couple of things that I want to highlight to wrap up. The first of those is the approach to grants that Rod mentioned towards the end of the interview. The approach needs to be one of project planning first. So this is exactly in line with what we've talked about before. You don't want to go and say, well, great, a grant's available. What can we get? It's more about, okay, here's our project. This is what we need to do. When the right grant comes up, then we're ready. We're at the front. We've got what government loves to call a shovel-ready project that is just ready to roll out. And finally, he also mentioned the importance of planning ahead. You can't just have a very short-term mindset when you're in a club, and that's critical to making sure that we're making decisions that are great for us now, as well as great for the people who'll be here for decades into the future. So thanks very much for joining us on what has been a really interesting ride for this episode, and one that certainly Chris and I have enjoyed watching the club take. If you don't already follow us on social media, you can do so. You can sign up for our newsletter at cprgroup.com.au, and we look forward to catching up with you next time for our next episode of Basket Case Clubs.